The young man behind the desk smiled the way a man smiles when he has already decided how a conversation will end. The young man behind the desk smiled the way a man smiles when he has already decided how a conversation will end. Mr. Whitaker, I've personally inspected the box. There is nothing in it. I'm sorry for the confusion, but our records are very clear. Harold Whitaker did not answer. He stood across the counter in a clean blue shirt, his hat turned slowly in his hands, and looked past the young man toward the wall of small brass doors behind him. Box 412. 43 years he had paid for that box. 43 years, every January, the same payment to the same bank, on the same morning, with the same pen. There were 2 envelopes in that box, Harold said quietly, and a photograph. The young man, whose nameplate read Derek Caldwell, branch manager, gave him a patient smile, the kind of smile that costs nothing. Sir, the box was empty when we opened it for the audit. I was there. 2 of my associates were there. I understand this is upsetting, but at your age, sometimes memory... A woman waiting in line behind Harold looked away, embarrassed for him. A man near the door pretended to read a brochure about retirement accounts. Harold did not move. He set his hat carefully on the counter, took out a small, worn receipt book from his shirt pocket, and laid it down between them. I'd like the name of your supervisor. Derek's smile thinned. I am the supervisor, Mr. Whitaker. Then I'd like the name of his. Harold Whitaker was 72 years old. He had lived on the same 40-acre parcel in Yell County, Arkansas for 51 years. Most of that time, his wife Ruth had been with him. The last 7 years, she had not. The land sat at the end of a gravel road that the county only graded twice a year, and the house at the end of it had a tin roof Harold had patched himself in 1994, the year his son Daniel went off to the Marines and never came back. He had bought the place in 1975 with money he had saved working the rail yards in Fort Smith. 23 years old, just home from Vietnam, quieter than he had left. He wanted something a landlord could not take from him. His own father had rented the same small house in Russellville for 41 years and died in it, owning nothing at all. Harold had stood at that funeral and made a promise to himself that no Whitaker after him would die on rented ground. So he bought 40 acres of pasture and scrub oak with a creek running through the back of it, and he and Ruth moved into a single-wide trailer on the property while he built the house himself, board by board, on weekends and evenings, for 2 years. The oak tree by the front porch had been there before the house was. Ruth used to sit under it on summer afternoons with a cup of coffee and a book. After she passed in 2019, Harold had buried her under that tree, with the county's permission and a small stone he had cut himself. He went out to that stone every evening at dusk. He did not always speak. Sometimes he just stood. Ruth had been the one who kept the records. Every receipt, every tax filing, every payment to the bank, every certificate, every deed amendment, every bank statement going back to 1975. She kept them in metal boxes in the small upstairs room she had called her office, labeled by year in her careful, slanted handwriting. After her funeral, Harold had not opened those boxes. He could not. The handwriting on the labels was harder to look at than the documents inside. The safe deposit box at First Yell County Bank was something separate. Ruth had insisted on it in 1981 after a tornado came through and took half the roof off the house. 3 things lived in that box. A copy of the original deed to the property, signed by old Mr. Hobart, who had sold it to Harold in 1975. A sealed envelope containing the agreement Harold had signed with the bank itself in 1982, the year he had taken out a small loan to buy a tractor, and a photograph. The photograph was the reason Harold had gone to the bank that morning. His grandson Caleb was getting married in October. Caleb had asked Harold for the picture, the one of Ruth and Harold on their wedding day in 1973, standing in front of the courthouse in Danville. Ruth had kept the original in the safe deposit box because she said no fire and no flood was going to take it from her. Harold had driven into town that Tuesday morning to retrieve it, and Derek Caldwell had told him the box was empty. That afternoon, Harold drove home in silence. He sat in his truck for a long while in the gravel drive before he went inside. Then he walked up the stairs to Ruth's office and stood in the doorway, looking at the row of metal boxes along the wall. There were 46 of them, one for every year from 1975 to 2021. Ruth had stopped 2 years before she died, and Harold had taken over after, but his were not as careful. He pulled the boxes labeled 1981 and 1982 down from the shelf and carried them to the kitchen table. Derek Caldwell was 34 years old. He held an MBA from a state university in Tennessee and had been the branch manager at First Yell County Bank for 14 months. He had been brought in from a regional office in Little Rock as part of what the bank called its Operational Efficiency Initiative. His quarterly bonus was tied to a metric called Legacy Account Reduction, which measured how many low-yield accounts older than 30 years he could close, consolidate, or render dormant in a given quarter. He had a spreadsheet open on his computer at all times, sorted by account age, with the oldest accounts highlighted in pale yellow at the top. Harold Whitaker's safe deposit box had been on that spreadsheet for 9 months. Derek had not stolen anything. He would have been offended at the suggestion. He had simply, on a Thursday in March, walked back to the vault with 2 associates, opened box 412 using the bank's master key after declaring the rental delinquent on a technicality involving an unsigned annual renewal form, and processed the contents according to the bank's abandoned property protocol. The contents had been logged as miscellaneous personal items, no apparent monetary value, and forwarded to a holding facility in Memphis for the standard 90-day review period before disposal. The whole process had taken him 11 minutes. He had not looked at the photograph. He had not read the deed. He had not opened the sealed envelope. He had simply checked 3 boxes on a form, signed his name, and gone back to his office for lunch. 2 days after the visit at the bank, Harold drove the 45 minutes to Russellville and walked into the office of a lawyer named May Hollingsworth. May was 61 years old, ran a small 2-person practice on the 2nd floor above a hardware store, and had handled Ruth's will. She listened to Harold's story for 35 minutes without interrupting once. Then she set down her pen. "Harold, I have to be honest with you. Banks win these cases. The paperwork is theirs. The vault is theirs. Without something showing what was in that box, it's your word against 3 of their employees." "I have something." She looked at him. "I have to drive home and find it, but I have it." That night, Harold sat at the kitchen table with the boxes from 1981 and 1982 open in front of him. He worked slowly. Ruth's handwriting was still on every folder, every divider. He did not rush. After 3 hours, he found what he was looking for in a folder labeled in her hand, Box 412, Inventory, updated 1996. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on Ruth's old electric typewriter, listing the contents of the safe deposit box as of August of 1996. The deed copy, the 1982 loan agreement, the wedding photograph. And stapled to the back of that page was something Harold had forgotten Ruth had done. A Polaroid. Ruth had taken a Polaroid of the inside of the open safe deposit box, with the contents laid out on the small table in the bank's viewing room, with a copy of the Yell County Gazette dated August 14, 1996, beside them for the date. The deed was visible. The sealed envelope was visible. The wedding photograph was visible, face up, Ruth and Harold smiling on the courthouse steps. On the back of the Polaroid, in Ruth's handwriting, Box 412, August 1996, in case they ever say it wasn't there. Harold sat with that Polaroid in his hands for a long time. He did not cry. He carried it carefully back to the truck the next morning and drove it to May Hollingsworth's office. May looked at it and was quiet for almost a full minute. "Harold," she said finally, "your wife was a serious woman." She was. "This is the kind of evidence that changes a case." Will it be enough? Combined with 43 years of paid rental receipts on that box, which I assume she also kept, every one of them. May nodded slowly. "Then we are going to file something on Monday." She filed a civil claim against First Yell County Bank for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of property, and negligent disposal of personal effects. She included the Polaroid, the inventory sheet, the receipts, and a sworn affidavit from Harold. The bank's response came back within 9 days. It was a single page. It dismissed the claim, called the photograph ambiguous, and called Ruth's typed inventory self-generated and unverifiable. It noted that the contents of the box had been lawfully processed under standard abandoned property protocol after multiple notices. May read the response twice and looked up at Harold across her desk. "They sent me a list of the notices," she said. 5 of them, all sent in the last 10 months. "I never got any notices." "I know you didn't, because they were sent to an address you haven't lived at since 1979. She set the page down. "Harold, they didn't just take the contents of your box. They built a paper trail to make it look legal, and they did it sloppy because they didn't think you'd ever push back." The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in late June in the small federal courtroom in Fort Smith. The judge was the Honorable Eleanor Vance, 68 years old, 26 years on the federal bench. She had a reputation for reading every page of every filing the night before a hearing, and for a particular impatience with corporate counsel who tried to dazzle her with volume. Derek Caldwell arrived at the courthouse at 8:40 in the morning in a dark gray suit. 2 attorneys from the bank's Little Rock counsel walked beside him, both in their early 30s, both carrying matching black leather folders. They sat on the right side of the courtroom and arranged their papers in 3 neat stacks. Harold walked in at 8:55. He wore a clean white shirt Ruth had ironed for him before she died, which he had kept folded in the closet for occasions. May had told him that morning he did not need to wear it. He told her he did. He carried his hat in his hands. May walked beside him with a single manila folder. Judge Vance entered at 9 sharp. She had read everything. The bank's lead attorney, a man named Patterson, stood and spoke for 19 minutes. He explained the abandoned property protocol. He cited 3 federal regulations. He produced copies of the 5 notices sent to Harold's outdated address. He explained that the bank had acted in full compliance with internal policy and applicable law. He used the phrase legacy account 4 times. He referred to the Polaroid as an unauthenticated photograph of unclear provenance. Judge Vance listened without expression. When Patterson finished and sat down, May Hollingsworth stood. She did not open her folder. "Your Honor, I have 3 sentences." The judge looked up. "The bank says the box was empty. My client says it was not. There is a photograph taken in 1996 by his late wife of the contents of that box on a bank table. I would like the court to look at it." She walked the Polaroid forward and handed it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. Judge Vance took the photograph in her hand. She looked at it. She turned it over. She read the back. The room was very still. She looked at it for what Harold later said was the longest minute of his life. Then she looked up. "Mr. Patterson." "Yes, Your Honor." "Your filing on page 31 states that the contents of Box 412, when opened on March 19th of this year, were, and I quote, miscellaneous personal items of no apparent monetary value, including one envelope, one document, and one photograph. Is that correct?" Patterson hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, that. So your own filing confirms there was a photograph in the box." Patterson did not answer for several seconds. "And your own filing confirms there was an envelope and a document." "Your Honor, the protocol, and yet your client testified to Mr. Whitaker in person in the branch lobby in front of 2 witnesses that the box was empty." The room was quiet. Derek Caldwell looked down at his hands. "Mr. Patterson, I have read your client's filings. I have read the bank's protocol. I have read Mr. Whitaker's claim. I have looked at this photograph. I am going to ask you one question, and I would like you to answer it carefully." She set the Polaroid down on the bench in front of her. "Where are the contents of Box 412 today?" Patterson opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the 2 associates beside him, both of whom were now looking at the table. "Your Honor, the contents were forwarded to our holding facility in Memphis, in accordance with the 90-day review. Are they still there?" A long pause. "We will need to confirm that, Your Honor." Judge Vance leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Patterson, this court is going to recess for 45 minutes. When we return, you will tell me where Mr. Whitaker's wedding photograph is. If you cannot tell me, I will rule from this bench, and I will rule against your client, and I will assess damages that reflect the fact that your client lied to this man in his own community bank, in front of his neighbors, about property his late wife had photographed 30 years ago, precisely because she did not trust people like your client to tell the truth." She stood. 45 minutes. When the court reconvened, Patterson stood without looking at his notes. "Your Honor, the contents of Box 412 have been located and are intact. The bank wishes to enter into immediate settlement discussions." Judge Vance did not smile. She looked at May. "Counsel?" May stood. "Your Honor, my client has authorized me to accept a settlement on 3 conditions. The contents of the box, including the photograph, returned today. Damages of $340,000 for breach of fiduciary duty, emotional distress, and conversion of property, and a written acknowledgement, signed by the bank's regional president, of what occurred, to be kept by my client and reproduced at his discretion." Patterson conferred with his associates for less than 2 minutes. He turned back. "The bank accepts." Harold drove home that evening with a small padded envelope on the seat beside him. Inside the envelope was the deed, the 1982 loan agreement, and the photograph of him and Ruth on the courthouse steps in 1973. He drove the gravel road slowly. He parked in front of the house and sat in the truck for a few minutes. Then he picked up the envelope and walked around the side of the house to the oak tree. The sun was going down. The light was the color Ruth had liked best, the late gold. Harold knelt down beside the stone with his name and hers on it, and he set the photograph against the base of the stone, face up. "They tried to say it wasn't there, Ruthie," he said. "They didn't know about the Polaroid." He stayed there for a while. He did not speak again. After some time, he picked up the photograph, put it back in the envelope, and walked back to the house. That night, he climbed the stairs to Ruth's office and put the inventory sheet back in the box labeled 1996, exactly where she had filed it. He closed the lid. He set the box back on the shelf in the spot where it had always been. He turned off the light. The next morning he drove to town and bought a stamp and an envelope and mailed the wedding photograph to his grandson Caleb in Tulsa, with a short note that said only, "Your grandmother put this where they couldn't lose it. Use it well."